here. And we are ready to.
Hi, I'm back.
Whoops. Okay, well, I'm going to turn down my volume here. One thing I always forget to do. Okay, so welcome everybody, and thank you. Welcome to Freethinker's Corner, Books and More. The May is for Mystery, our author series. Tonight's guest is Dave Zeltserman. He's a Boston-based author. He writes crime and noir horror novels. He's the author of the Julius Katz series. His books have been picked by NPR, the Washington Post, American Library Association, Booklist, my goodness, WBUR as the best novels of the year. Julius Katz mystery novels have won the Shamus, Derringer, and 2 Ellery Queen Readers Choice Awards. Published in 7 languages, and he is a diehard Pats and Sox fan.
Yep.
Dave, welcome to A Freethinker's Corner.
Thank you, Chris.
So how diehard of a Pats fan are you? How do you think they're going to do this year? Are you rooting all the way, or?
Yeah, I mean, I lived and died with them for a lot of years. Since 2001, it's been amazing. I think they rebuilt the team. They have a shot. I mean, I'm still a Brady fan. I don't care where he is. So I was rooting for Tampa Bay last year. And this whole thing was kind of crazy. It's like when you have teams shutting down because of a pandemic, in the Patriots case, they had like 8 of their top 8 players. A lot of the top defense players sitting out because of the pandemic. It's hard to take this season too seriously.
Yeah. I like it. I find it entertaining. We watch them. We have a book in the store called The Dynasty, and it was written back in September of last year by Jeff Benedict.
Okay.
He's worked with CNN, Sports Illustrated, and all that kind of stuff. He spent a few years with the organization. And it's a fantastic book. We have it in store if you're ever interested. We also did an interview with him. You can check that out. So your books have been published in 7 languages. I was told by Dale, we had Dale Phillips last night, and he wanted me to mention that you're very big in Germany.
Yeah, the Germans like me. Actually, one of my books, I have a book that's scheduled to come out there, and it hasn't, it may never get published in English. So it may only be published in German.
Are you like the David Hasselhoff of literature over there?
Yeah, I have my fans there.
You do.
They like crime noir. They like dark fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And so, they like my stuff.
Have you ever been over there to do like signings and or anything? Or
no, the only I've been to 2 countries in Europe. When I was working for Nokia, I went to Finland and spent time in Helsinki. And when I was a kid, I went to Spain. And that's it for Europe.
What other languages are? Well, I'm assuming it's Spain, Germany. What other languages are your books in?
Let's see. My books are in German, French, Italian, Lithuanian, Thai, and what do they speak in Denmark? Whatever that is.
Dutch, I think.
I don't think it's Dutch. It's Holland. Whatever language that is.
So how does one?
English.
Yeah. How does one get their books in a different language? Did the publishers come to you? Did or printers or somebody come to you, or did you just do it in a different language and hope that it?
Well, usually your publisher will sell the different foreign language rights. With my very first book, I actually first sold it to an Italian publisher before I found a small US publisher for it. So that was kind of an unusual situation, but I was part of this noir discussion group called Rare Avis that used to be a lot of fun and used to, used to be pretty lively. We had some very interesting people on this list, and some people who I'd shown my book Fastlane to were discussing it, talking about it, and someone who translated books for one of the Italian publishers was interested. I showed it to him. He talked his publisher into acquiring it. So my very first book sale was to Italy. So I was first published in Italian before I was published in English.
Now we find that quite often when some new books by major publishers come out, they actually get printed and published over in England first. And so people are coming to me saying, "Can you get this book? I want this book." Well, it's not here yet. It's only available over there right now.
Well, my first publisher was Serpentsteel, which was a London-based publisher, and so yeah, my books were published a year earlier there than they, and then I had to wait a year for them to get to the United States.
We're definitely going to be talking about your publishing and getting into your publishing and your background in writing and writing style and all that kind of stuff in a little while. I forgot that I wanted to read a quote from Maureen Corrigan of the Washington Post. She says, "If there's any other young writer out there who does crime noir better than Zeltserman, I don't even want to know." You mentioned it. She mentioned it. What is crime noir?
Well, a lot of people have different definitions for noir. There's film noir, and then there's literary noir. And on the old Rare Avis list, we used to have endless debates over what noir is. Now, my definition of noir is more of a James M. Cain, Jim Thompson like definition, where a character crosses a moral line. They do something reprehensible, something that there's no coming back from. And from that point on, you're watching as that character is going to drop into the abyss. They might fool you to think that they have a chance of surviving, but there's really no hope for them. There's, what they've done just can't be undone. But different people have different definitions. So you're going to have some people who are going to water down that definition and just make it anything that's dark or anything that has a darkness to it. But I take a more more definitive approach to what I consider noir. So in other words, there are no happy endings in noir. There aren't going to be any, and there aren't going to be any sequels. If a book's a series and they call themselves noir, that doesn't fit my definition of noir.
Well, then your Julius Katz series is definitely not a noir because it's obviously a big series. Let's go ahead and start with that. Let's talk about your Julius Katz series.
Yeah. So what happened with that? There's a contest every year that started. I don't know when it started. Probably around 2006, 2005, 2004, something around that. Called the Black Orchid Contest, which was in collaboration with Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine and the Wolf Pack. And the goal there was a contest to pick a story that they felt best represented the Nero Wolfe-like story. And I don't know if you've read Nero Wolfe or Rex Stout. I'm a big fan of Rex Stout, and the Nero Wolfe books are great. What you have with Nero Wolfe is you have this brilliant, eccentric detective living in New York, very lazy, likes, if it was up to him, he'd only drink beer and fool around with his orchids all day and never do any work. But his habits cost money, and so his assistant Archie Goodwin will always pester him and eventually force Nero to take a case. And it's kind of in a way, it's kind of like an offshoot of the old Sherlock Holmes Watson. And so in this case, Archie's what makes this series so brilliant is it's a mixture of the traditional mystery with the hard boiled, because Archie's a hard-boiled PI. He goes out there, gathers all the information, gets beat up, beats up others, does whatever he has to. And in the end, he gets the information, all the possible suspects are gathered together, and Neil Wolf deduces who the guilty party is. And the books are just a lot of fun. And so what I did when I wanted to write I'd say more of an homage than a pastiche to this, and entered into the Black Orchid contest, I wrote a story called Julius Katz. So you have the Nero Julius Wolf Katz. So you have that play on the name. And in Nero Wolf, Nero's 1/7 of a ton. He's a big guy, doesn't like activity. And again, he's a gourmet. He loves to drink, spend all day just drinking beer, puttering around, and then spending hours with his orchids. And my Julius Katz is a little bit different. He's very athletic, good looking, has a 5th-degree black belt in Shaolin Kung Fu. And his pastimes, what he really enjoys is gambling, womanizing, which Neil Wolf would never get anywhere near a woman, and collecting and drinking expensive wines instead of beer. And my personal taste, I prefer beer over wine, but wine made it more interesting because it gave Julius a very expensive hobby. Some of these wine can, a bottle of very expensive wine can be $100,000 or more dollars. So it gives Julius an incentive to take on these cases. And like Nero, he's very lazy. He prefers not working, only works when he needs to support his very expensive lifestyle. And like Nero, he has a sidekick named Archie. But in his case, Archie is a piece of whiz-bang, advanced piece of AI housed in a tie clip that Julius wears, and communicates with Julius through a speaker, that earpiece that Julius wears, and has visual and auditory circuitry and a very advanced neural network, and really has the heart and soul of a hard-boiled PI. And all Archie wants to do is figure out how to solve a case before Julius. Keep tinkering with his neural network until he can beat Julius to the punch in solving a case. And so as with the Neil Wolf books, these stories are narrated by Archie. And as with the Neil Wolf books, while the mystery is important, and my stories, I think I've put together some very intricate, very tight mysteries that actually are a lot harder to plot than my crime novels. But the real attraction to these stories and to the Neil Wolf books is the humor and the relationship between the brilliant detective and his sidekick. So even though Archie is just a little tie clip that's worn, there's a very almost touching relationship between Julius and Archie. And so the first story I wrote, Julius Katz, didn't win the Black Orchid. So I submitted it to Ellery Queen, and Ellery Queen ended up publishing it, and it ended up winning the Shamus Award, and ended up winning 3rd place in their Readers Choice Award, which is, their readers pick their favorite stories of the year, and also won a Derringer Award. And so while I never expected to write a Julius Katz series, with the reaction that the first story got, I wrote a second story where Archie is framed for murder. This little tie pin clip ends up being framed for murder, and Julius has to save his bacon. And that story ended up winning Ellery Queen's Readers' Choice Award. And additional story later won the awards. I just kept writing them. And they're a lot of fun to write. They're difficult to plot. They take a lot of effort to plot them, but Archie's such a fun voice that once I have it plotted, it's a breeze to write. And I think I've sold about 17 or 18 of these to Ellery Queen, and they've published. They still have 2 to publish, and I just submitted another one just recently. So I'll just keep writing them as long as they keep buying them. Yeah.
And do people have to read them in order, or are they all sort of standalone?
They can be read in any order.
Because I know
well, they,
because I
they
know with some
sort of.
series, yeah, because I know with some
Sort of.
series, there's usually a growth of the characters and stuff, and there's maybe references to previous books. Do you have that in there, or?
There's a pivotal event that occurs in the middle story. It's the title of that story is Julius Katz in the Case of Exploding Wine. Notice it's the case of exploding wine and not the case of the exploding wine. So that one preposition makes all the difference in what, not only the title, but what happens. So in that story, without giving too much away, Julius's townhouse and everything he owns gets blown up. And it ends up being 2 mysteries that need to be solved, and it kind of changes things a little bit. You know, while Archie stays an innocent throughout the series, Julius gets a little bit more hardened. Not that he was ever a soft and fuzzy guy, but this story definitely has its impact on him. So and it also introduces another character that becomes a pivotal character later in the series. So,
did you have to research any AI or anything like that to make Archie's character?
No, I worked in. I've been working in high tech, you know, as a software engineer for a lot of years. So whatever I came up with for Archie was just you know, what I've been dealing with for years. Now I did write the story before I ever heard about Apple Siri or, you know, or any of the other assistants. So this story came before that. But think of Archie as a very advanced personal assistant with a personality and a lot of capability. Archie's very good at hacking. So while the stories are in some ways really difficult to write because they're very sedentary, I mean, Archie isn't going to be moving around. There's still quite a bit of action in them.
Does Archie have well, is he more like say Commander Data from Star Trek, or more like Kit from I'm kind of going back to the David Hasselhoff reference?
Archie has a full-fledged personality. He's you know, again, he's got a complex neural network. He's very loyal to Julius, but he also badly wants to beat Julius in solving a case. So he keeps observing Julius. In almost all of these, he'll come up with a reasonable guess as to who the murderer is. He'll always be wrong. You know, Julius will always be at least one step, usually 2 or 3 steps ahead of him, and Archie will just keep trying to learn and keep adapting his network. Although one story is titled "Archie Solves the Case," and that story Archie claims that he deserves equal credit for solving the cases with Julius for a reason I don't want to give away.
Okay.
You know, but I think these stories are a lot of fun. Readers really like them. I mean, the stories are very popular with Ellery Queen readers, and they're night and day different than my crime novels. You know, they're very clean in that, you know, they're written for Ellery Queen, so they're, you know, while there can be some violence, most of it takes place off camera. There's no sex. There's the only profanity is hinted at or suggested, but you know, so they're really for any reader, and readers seem to like them a lot. And I can only imagine a Julius Katz reader finding my book Pariah and having a heart attack because that book is about as extreme as any crime novel ever written.
So it does sound like a very like
Pariah,
Sherlock Holmes.
Pariah was that was that Maureen Corrigan quote about noir.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it does sound very Sherlock Holmes like. Did you read a lot of Sherlock Holmes?
Not
growing up
before I wrote any of these. I never read any Sherlock Holmes. I think I tried reading Hound of the Baskervilles when I was a kid, and it didn't stick. But about a year ago, or maybe a year and a half ago, I decided to just read all of the Sherlock Holmes stories and novels, and I did like them quite a bit. But it took me a long time before I actually went through all the Holmes stuff.
Mhm.
But
Well,
I was just going to say, but I did read all the Rex Stout books.
I was gonna say, was he your influence then on wanting to write crime noir thrillers?
I'd say my influence was Dashiell Hammett. I love Hammett. Hammett to me is, the very best guy at the very top, and he only wrote 5 novels. I mean, Hammett wrote, the 24 Continental Op stories, which are just gold. I mean, if you like crime fiction, you have to read the Continental Op. And then there were the 2 Continental Op novels, Red Harvest and Dane Curse. And Red Harvest is probably the best crime novel ever written, in my opinion. And also, I think Time Magazine, when they came up with the 50 best crime novels, 100 best crime novels, Red Harvest was near the top of that. It's just a great book. Jim Thompson's another big influence. Jim Thompson is probably, when I read him, he opened up the doorway for me of how to write. Before I read Jim Thompson, I was trying to ape Ross MacDonald, who was another big influence when I was younger. And I did not, and my stuff came out as very bad Ross MacDonald imitation. Then when I read Jim Thompson, I just saw that you could basically do whatever you wanted to, as long as you could figure out how to make it work. There were no rules. I mean, Jim Thompson would drag his readers into his character's hell, into sucker you into thinking that they're normal, decent guys, and then you realize that these people are crazy as hell. And he'd do things like have 2 different streams of consciousness, like in Hell of a Woman, where you have a schizophrenic mind and you have both streams of consciousness being intermixed. And so once I read Thompson, it just kind of struck a chord where, okay, I don't have to ape someone. It helped me find my own voice, and I could break the rules. I could write what I wanted to write without following the strict, strict guideline, like, trying to imitate Ross MacDonald or imitate Raymond Chandler. So that was a very liberating experience.
When did you start writing?
I, probably as a kid, I'd write short stories now and then, and through college I'd write occasionally, but I was always like a math and computer science person. So, college, my degree was, I was in the School of Engineering, majoring in applied math and computer science. So never really thought I had the right to write. Yeah, like I wasn't an English major. I didn't do very well in my English SATs. I did very well in my math SATs. But I read a lot. I mean, I read there was stages in my life where I was reading a book a day, and start off reading, fantasy, then moved to sci-fi, and then once I discovered Mickey Spillane, I just started reading crime fiction.
Did you take any classes or anything along the way, or
No.
was it just from reading, and what you like to read is what you like to write?
Yeah. I mean, once I started thinking that I might be able to actually write something that's publishable, I started reading books on writing and started reading, elements of grammar and stuff like that, and self-teaching myself and studying, just picking apart the books I really loved and understanding how these authors did what they did. But and after I wrote Small Crimes, I did take like a 2-week workshop that was with one of the local colleges here, and actually Dennis Lehane and Sterling Watson were the 2 instructors for that, and but the impact I got from that, I was already publishing short stories at that point, and I was getting Small Crimes rejected by everyone at that point, every New York publisher. And but the impact that class gave me was feedback from some of the other students, because I'd written Small Crimes for people who love noir. So I was getting people like Ken Grun and Vicki Hendricks and some other writers were reading it. They were telling me they loved the book, but I wasn't getting any feedback from the typical reader. And the typical reader reading it were horrified. And I realized I had to tone things down a bit. I couldn't be as in your face as I was if I wanted to get. Although Sippensteel told me when they read my first draft, they told me they would have published it, but they liked the second draft that I wrote later from the feedback, where I kind of hid Joe Denton's moral corruption a little bit better, at least early on. Made it a little slower reveal.
Okay. So did you ever partake in any like writers groups, be it in person or online, or?
When I first started thinking that I might be able to write something good enough to get published, I joined a writers group that was meeting in Boston. I did that for like a couple of months. It was a good experience. I made some friends there, and these weren't mystery or crime writers. These were just people of all different, poetry or whatever, but it was so that was the one. So I did that very early on, and then later again I did that 2-week workshop. That was with Pine Man College, and it was a good experience. But I'd already written Small Crimes, but it did help me realize that I needed to make things a little, make the character a little more palatable for the average reader before, if I wanted to get wider readership with it. I'll tell you one story. One of my novels, my second novel that I wrote, Bad Thoughts, I sent it to this one agent who had read my first novel, Fastlane, and he liked it. He wanted to see what I had next. And when he read this, he told me, "What the fuck's wrong with you? Are you insane? Are you mentally ill?" And I realized that I needed to tone things down. So that type of feedback did help.
So you had mentioned Alfred Hitchcock a while ago, and you also write horror. You wrote a book called "The Boy Who Killed."
Boy
Who
Killed Demons.
Demons. Thank you.
Yeah.
I had dames, demons, Danes. I couldn't read my own writing here. The Boy Who Killed Demons. And then you also wrote another one called Monster, a novel of Frankenstein, and that was likened to an ingenious interpretation of Mary Shelley's tale. Now, I love Frankenstein. I think that the book, the movie that was done with, I want to say Al Pacino, but it wasn't Al Pacino. It was, anyways, yes, Robert De Niro.
It's actually much better than that. Showtime had this series, Penny Dreadful, and they had this running arc with Frankenstein's monster that captured Shelley's. I mean, it wasn't Shelley's book, but captured the spirit of her book better than anything I've seen. I mean, it was just great.
I'll have to watch that because I love, that's one of my favorite classic monster horror fiction. So tell us about these two.
Okay, so Monster, the premise of Monster is, what if everything that happened before I talk about, let me just say, I think Shelley's book is brilliant. And the fact that she wrote it as a 19-year-old is just, that a 19-year-old could write something that great is just amazing. So the premise of this book is, what if everything that happens, all the major events that happens in Shelley's book that's reported by Captain Walton actually happened, but for very different reasons than what Victor Frankenstein is saying. So the things that could be observed did happen, but Victor Frankenstein is lying to Captain Walton to protect his, his reputation. And so in this version, there's a very interesting travel log that takes place in Shelley's Frankenstein. You go from Ingolstadt, Germany, to Geneva, to Scotland, to actually England to Scotland, back to Switzerland, and then eventually up to the North Pole. So this book follows the same travelogue, and all the major events that happen in Shelley's book happens here, but again, for very different reasons. In this book, again, told by the perspective of the monster, which Shelley does to a degree with, because for a section of the book, Captain Walton is reporting what the monster is telling him. But in this book, it's told by the monster, and turns out that Victor Frankenstein is in league with Marquis de Sade to bring one of Marquis de Sade's novels to life. And instead of the monster being created by some unexplained scientific experiment, as in Shelley's book, he's brought to life through satanic forces, and it's quite an interesting. I think it's quite an interesting book. It has a lot of different elements to it. There's a section that takes place in England, in London, which I like quite a bit, where the monster is traveling the streets of London late at night, where during this time period there would be no lamps or anything; it'd be pitch black. And in London during that time would have these very vicious gangs roaming the streets and committing atrocious acts. And there was actually a real gang back then where they cut off the noses of the poor people that they came across, and they collect the noses. So I had this gang there. They called them. This wasn't the actual name, but I called them the pig snout collectors. And so they want to collect the monster's snout. They can't see how big he is or what he really is. And so that was a very fun little section to write. And just as in the little, you have this party with Lord Byron that ended up resulting in the Frankenstein novel, and also a short novelette or story. I can't remember the name of the author, called The Vampire. So I had that vampire creature also in in Monster, and the whole Marquis de Sade thing worked out very well. And I think it's an interesting novel. It's it's if you're gonna take this, some people were offended that I did this, but people who were willing to be a little open and understand that this was really more of an homage to Shelley than the offense they took, it seemed to like it quite a bit. So it made Booklist best horror books of the year list, and got some other really good responses. Made some other best of the year list. And it's a book that it took me longer to write Monster than any of my other books. I mean, Pariah took 6 weeks. Monster took about 9 months of research and then another year of writing. It was a very intimidating book to write. And the language, the voice sounds a little bit, I mean, it's not Shelley's voice, but it sounds like it could be almost Shelley's voice, but it's easier to read. I mean, I think the one issue with Frankenstein is a lot of people give up on it because it can be a very dense book with a voice. And until you get to the point where you get the monster story, it can be a bit of a slog. But in Shelley's book, once you get to the monster story, it's just fascinating.
So would you consider this like a fanfic or a speculative fiction type subgenre?
No, it's a gothic horror novel. It's pretty much standalone.
Did you have to have her book next to you as you're writing it so that so how did you do it? Did you read a passage of her book and then just write your passage of it, or?
Nope. I probably read about 30 different books as research for this. So yeah, I'd read Shelley's book before. I reread it, read a lot of other books, read biographies on the Marquis de Sade, read books about witchcraft in Europe. I just read, I can't think of the name of the German supernatural writer, but read a bunch of his writings, which I kind of worked into this. I just read a lot of different history books at that time period to get this, right. And then it was just a matter of writing a detailed outline and working on the book. But it's actually there's actually quite a bit in it. It's a short book, but there's a lot in it. Boy Who Killed Demons is almost an experimental book. It's written as a diary of a 15-year-old who started seeing some people in the Boston area as demons as opposed to humans, and he's trying to understand why this is happening. And he becomes convinced that there's a plot among these demons to open up the gates of hell, and it's up to him to stop this. And whether or not he's actually seeing a neighbor as a demon and other people as demons, or whether he's mentally ill, remains up to the reader to discover. Probably my most most read horror book is The Caretaker of Lorne Field. That's one where American Library Association picked as shortlisted as one of the best horror novels of the year. And that one has probably, of all my books, the best reaction from readers. And right now it's in film development. The guy who wrote Black Swan wrote the screenplay for this, and hopefully, if it wasn't for the pandemic, I think this would have gotten made already, and hopefully it will get made over the next year. But Caretaker is a pretty interesting book. It's a book where you have a family that's been responsible for weeding a New England field for hundreds of years. They're under contract, and the caretaker every day after first thaw to first frost goes out to this field, and about the size of maybe 3 football fields, and spends all day pulling up weeds. And he believes he's saving the world every day, that if he doesn't do this, the weeds will develop into monsters and the world will end very quickly after that. And the town people used to believe in this, and the caretaker and his family used to be treated very well. And now that we're in modern days, people think they're just throwing money away, giving this caretaker this free home and paying him this measly stipend, and that they could be using the money otherwise. And the caretaker's there's no respect anymore for the caretaker's position, but he still goes out there every day thinking he's saving the world. And through the course of the book, things get more and more difficult for him as, because, the world has changed and people no longer believe in this. And his attempts to convince the town that this is real backfire on him spectacularly. And so with some luck, this will get made. And this book actually had an interesting reason, inspiration for writing it. My inspiration was, when my wife and I were living, in our front yard, we had this, I think it was a black locust tree. We had this whole network of this whole root system underneath our lawn that would spring up all these little black locust, trees. And if I didn't pick these out, we'd have a forest in our front yard. So I'd spend all day going back and forth, picking out these little black locust things. And I told my wife, I'm going to write a book about this. And she told me I was crazy. So I had to write something.
So with the exception of obviously the Mary Shelley Frankenstein novel, are most of your books set in and around the Boston area, New England area?
Well, I think so. Let me just have to give this some thought.
You know, the Julius Katz says.
Yeah, Julius Katz says Small Crimes is set in a fictional Vermont town. Killers set in the Boston area. Pariah is set in the Boston area plus New Hampshire. Outsource is set in Boston area. Husk, New England. I have one book that's set in hell. Everybody Lies in Hell. So that's
Okay.
So that's hell, but the detective lives in a imagined version of Brooklyn. I have a series that I wrote for Kensington under a pseudonym that takes place in Los Angeles, and it's a serial killer. It's a serial killer series, but it really is. It is and it isn't. I try to make it something different than a typical serial killer books. But the reason I chose Los Angeles was I needed a place where there could be enough murders each year where it makes sense. And then I had to figure, where did I want to kill people? In Los Angeles and New York, and I decided I'll kill people in Los Angeles.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because that was the next thing I was going to ask you. It's the Morris Brook Thrillers series, or Jacob Stone.
Yeah.
So a bunch of questions now coming from just what you said. But my first question was, why a pseudonym?
Kensington wanted a pseudonym because these were going to be different than my crime and horror novels. So they wanted to differentiate them for marketing purposes. And then I worked with the editor there to come up with the right pseudonym. The detective's name was Morris Brick, so I figured Brick Stone kind of made sense. So they picked the first name Jacob. So that's where I came from.
So we were talking about Boston bases. Obviously, you're from Boston, the Boston area, so you know Boston. Los Angeles. How have you been to Los Angeles? Did you live there for a while?
Yeah, I traveled to Los Angeles a bunch of times. My first book actually takes place in Colorado, in Boulder. I have another book that takes place in Boulder. I went to school in Boulder. Actually, no, I'm sorry. First book takes place in Denver, and I have another book that takes place in Boulder. But yeah, I spent enough time in Los Angeles, but if I can write monster that takes place in 18th century Europe, and I can write a book that takes place in hell, I can, my imagination is good enough that I can kind of, figure out what I need to. And I write a bunch of short stories that take place in Kansas for some reason. Kansas to me seems like a good place for really bad things to happen. And so I write noir stories. Alfred Hitchcock has published a couple of noir stories of mine that take place in Kansas. So, and I've really never spent much time in Kansas. So, yeah, I can write stuff in places I haven't been to.
So do you ever worry about somebody who is from that area? Like we used to live in San Diego for a while, and we would go to Los Angeles, not a lot, but enough to know how to get around. Would people recognize that or say, no, that's not the building, or do you purposely change some things so that it's not?
I use a lot of fictional buildings. I don't use, I mean, it's a mix, but I also use Google Earth a lot, so I know how to get around. So,
Mhm.
but if a street changes from one way to the other, a different hour of the day, I guess they'll nail me on that.
Okay. One thing that we've had a couple books from local authors come through with a lot of based in Boston, and a lot of detail where if you were to live around there, you would know the highway system, you would know where the different streets are, what the different buildings are. Do you get that technical, or do you think that's a good thing? Where
I don't like reading that when I read. I'm more of a pulp writer mentality. I like getting to the story. I don't like cluttering things up with too much detail. I like my writing tends to be pretty sparse, spare.
do you
So
do you stick to more of the well-known places, like in town, or like Fenway Park or the airport, that
no,
type of thing, or
no. But again, again, you know, that type of detail is not as important in my writing, and it's not that important in my reading. It's I think there'll be a sense. I think people have a strong sense of the location. But for example, my novel Husk has a good part of it take place in New Hampshire, but takes place in some backward area of New Hampshire that nobody knows about, where you have this cannibal clan living, and and they might come across the occasional hiker basically delivering food on delivering food to them, but it still creates there'll still be a strong sense of location, even though it's a totally fictitious part of New Hampshire. So it doesn't have to have a recognizable. I mean, there'll be in prior, I'll create a sense of South Boston, but it doesn't necessarily have to map to an actual block in South Boston, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So these ones that take place in Los Angeles, they're more of on the crime side of
So Los Angeles, I'd probably go into a little, because of the genre, the thriller genre, I'd probably go into a little bit more detail as to location. So there, the locations probably map out a little bit stronger than other places, but basically, what I tried to do with there were 5 Morse books written and a couple of Morse books, short stories. One that Alfred Hitchcock has published, and the other that I hope Alfred Hitchcock buys. I'm still waiting on that one. But what I tried to do is expand the genre. I didn't want to write the typical serial killer book. That didn't appeal to me. And so what I tried to do was make each book very different than each other, and not make the serial killers just psychotic killers, but have there be a real purpose for what they're doing, and make them all just different styles of book, even though they have the same hero chasing after the serial killer. But then the idea of just having a psychotic or deeply deranged person going around killing people was not something I wanted to write. But Kensington wanted this genre for me, so I wrote something that it's very I've seen different readers, you know, basically say that that they are amazed at how each book is very different from the other, and that's something that I'm pretty proud of. Because and again, I think I expanded the genre. I wrote something very different um, than what anyone else is doing in this genre.
So who are some of your current favorite or favorite current crime fiction, and have you some of these other changes in your writing style? Have you modeled sort of off of them or meshed them together to come up with this
No,
new?
no. Once I found my voice, I mean, there's some Hammett and a little bit of my stuff. When I read, I didn't realize at the time when I looked at Small Crimes later, I realized that there was a little bit of Dan Marlowe in that. But I think pretty much what I write is just my voice. And I can write a lot of different styles. I don't, again, anyone who reads Pariah and then reads Julius Katz will be amazed. You're reading one of the darkest, most violent, darkest crime novels imaginable, than reading something that's light and fun like Julius Katz.
So who are some of your contemporary favorites right now that you're reading?
I tend to stick with the writers I really love, like I'm still working my way through Donald Westlake's, so I don't think you'd consider him contemporary, but so I've read all the Richard Starks, and I'm working my way through the Dortmunders now. I like, I've had a bunch of indie writers who write PI novels, who, if they had written these books like in the early 90s, they could have gotten them published, but publishing industry has changed so much that they can't. Like Dale Phillips is a good example. His stuff, his Zach Taylor books, anyone who likes Robert B. Parker would love Dale's Zach Taylor books. And I've read a few other PI writers who just can't get published by mainstream publishers today, but the stuff is also very good. Trying to think, it's hard for me to, like right now, I've been reading, it's not crime fiction, but I've been also, the writers who I'm just going through all their stuff right now is Phil Roth and Westlake, and who was it who wrote noir recently? Christopher Moore.
I don't know. I'm not really familiar with that.
Christopher Moore wrote a book called Noir that was really just great. It's kind of it's not noir. It's kind of a 1930s. It's like almost like a slapstick comedy, 1930s style film, but it's a lot of fun. Been reading a lot of short fiction. David Dean is very good. He writes some really good short stories. John Langan wrote a really good horror novel that I read recently, The Fisherman. That's just great. So that's about it, because again, I've just been working my way through the Dortmunder series over the last 6 months, and Philip Roth novels.
Well, over on Facebook, we happen to have Dale Phillips is watching and listening. So when you mentioned him, he gave out a quick woohoo. Thank you. So one of your big books, Small Crimes, you've mentioned it quite a few times. The reason why I would leave this till the end is it was turned into a Netflix film.
Yeah.
How exciting was that?
It was good to see. Just to be totally honest, at that point, I'd been dealing with different film, options for like 10 years. I had like 3 different or 4 different books under option, and we'd come close with one of them outsourced really close, and so Caretaker was another one that was under option then, and it's now under option with a different filmmaker. And so Small Crimes looked like it would be the lowest probability of the ones that were going to get made. So it was more of a relief to finally get one of these made, because again, I've been living with this for like 10 years, and we came so damn close with Outsourced, and that would have been a really big film, But the actor who they settled on kind of killed the project. He made the producers jump through a ton of hoops, and he did this for like 2 years before, at the very end, right before they were going to film it, he told them, "Nope, not doing it. I'm doing a play instead." And but actually seeing Small Crimes get made was a lot of fun. So we went there during the filming. When we showed up, the producers it was being filmed outside of Montreal, and that day it was being filmed in the house that they had for Joe Denton's parents' house. It was on the outskirts of Montreal, and when we arrived, they put us up in this room in the on the top floor. We were sitting with one of the producers as they were like going through one of the scenes, and then hearing all of a sudden hearing the Jamie Lannister, Nikolai Coster-Waldau, who started start yelling and shouting, and Robert Forster and I'm showing a blank on the name of the actress playing her parents, yelling and shouting back at him. It was a surreal experience, But then later they let us back downstairs, and we watched the filming, and it was fun for the first hour or so, and then it gets very boring very quickly.
Molly Parker.
Molly Parker was in it. Gary Cole was amazing. All the Nikolai was just remarkable in it.
Jackie Weaver.
Jackie Weaver played the mom. Okay. She was Jackie Weaver and Robert Forster and Nikolai were all there when we went up there. They film in stages, so they film in like a week with one set of actors, a week with another set of actors. So that week was Robert Forster and Jackie Weaver and Nikolai. And both Robert Forster and Jackie Weaver were incredibly nice. Nikolai was very nice. Called me a sick bastard for writing the book. Watching him, you're watching this, professional. You get in character like about 30. They film the same scene over and over and over again from different angles. And so he get in character about 30 seconds or so before the scene would start, muttering to himself, swearing whatever he had to do. And so we went there on a good day. There was a lot of action that day. All the scenes were pretty action packed, and it was an interesting experience. Had dinner with Robert Forster. What they do is they break for what they call lunch around 7 o'clock, and they'll take everyone to this big area where they have like benches and long rows of tables, and my wife, who's usually pretty shy, was pretty bold. She, Rob Forster was one of our favorite actors, so she sat down right next to him after he got his food. So I joined them, and he told us all a bunch of stories, like how his first movie was with Marlon Brando and Elizabeth Taylor, how he got into acting and all that stuff, and it was quite an experience. I actually told I told Robert Forster that he'd be perfect for a book of mine called Killer, And then about a year later, I heard from him. He read the book, loved it, and we were trying to figure out how to make it. We were thinking of trying to do a podcast with it, and unfortunately, he passed away.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, well, my previous life before a bookstore owner, I was an air traffic controller for 27 years, but I got my start out in San Diego. That's where I was, small airport. And I don't know if you remember the show Silk Stockings. It was
yeah,
a crime show there on like the
yeah,
WB network or whatever. Well, they would film quite often airports, airplane scenes, and helicopter scenes at the airport that I worked with, small airport right in just north of downtown San Diego. And two parallel runways, and then a crossing runway. They use the crossing one to do other stuff, and we'd have to weave their filming amongst all the normal business traffic that was coming in and out. But the pilot did invite us down to lunch quite often because they'd be there for a whole week filming
yeah.
different angles and different parts of it. And they had quite the spread, prime
Yeah.
rib and all these salads.
This wasn't quite as nice as that. It was a small budget film.
Mhm.
And it was being filmed out in the middle of nowhere in Montreal. So food was decent, and but it was just fun. It was fun sitting there with a couple of the producers and Robert Forster. Nikolai had his family there that day, so so he bypassed the canteen. But it was, and Jackie Weaver was getting, she was going to get shot in the next scene, so they were like fitting her up with blood packs or whatever they had to, so that things would explode when she got shot. So she had a miss dinner.
So I usually save this part for the end, but it seems where yours was made into a major motion picture. How did that come about? Was it from your publisher? Was it?
No. Small Crimes, NPR picked Small Crimes as the best crime and mystery novel of the year when it came out. And so that got the book a lot of attention. Actually, Bill Clinton, he wasn't president then, but he actually ordered like a case of the books, a whole bunch of the books to give out as presents. So the book had, because Washington Post picked it as one of the best books of the year, and NPR picked it as their favorite. I had a lot of film interest. I got a bunch of different, people who made Reservoir Dogs contacted me. I had probably over the years, probably about a dozen or so different studios and different people expressed interest. What happened with that was Memento Films was talking to me about Caretaker, and they never mentioned Small Crimes, but at the very end, when they made the offer for Caretaker, they made it like a 2-for-1 offer. They made an offer also for Small Crimes at the same time. And so so they kind of sprung at me. I didn't even expect to be optioning it to them, but so I optioned them both books. And Evan Katz, his brother, who's in the business, got him to read the book. He loved it. He wanted to do it, so they got him to do it, and I think he did a really nice job. And the book's like about 300 pages, so there's absolutely no way you're gonna you're gonna adapt it exactly. I mean, you're gonna have to cut out about a third of the book easily to get it to fit. And it's also not, the budget was not a massive budget. So it's a decent budget, but not something where you could do everything you wanted to do. And so I think they did stuff in a pretty ingenious way. I mean, they cut out the last third of the book, which if I was adapting it, I'd probably do the same. I mean, it'd be great to have the whole book in there, but you could make the leap from a certain point to the end logically. So a third of the book was gone. I liked some of the things he did. My main character, Joe Denton, is this disgraced ex-cop who just got out of prison, or really county jail, for disfiguring the DA who was building a case against him. If this was any other person, he probably, you'd go away to prison for, but he got treated fairly lightly. And now that he's out, he's just lying to himself over and over about how he's going to redeem himself, and just feeding himself one lie after the next, and never able to own responsibility for what he did. And what they did in the movie as a way to kind of show this aspect of Joe was, whenever Joe's about to, try to manipulate someone, he's practicing in the movies. He's repeating to himself the lies he's going to tell that person, kind of like rehearsing it. And I thought that was kind of a clever way to get that element in in much less time. Like, like the whole point of making the movie is, how can you take something that takes 20 pages or 30 pages in the book and get the same thing shown in like a glance or a look or a second. And so in the book, I have this character Charlotte who ends up being batshit crazy, and they're able to do to get that shown in the movie with Molly Parker, who I thought was great in it, with just a few with her expression, a few glances, a few few things she says, so they were able to reproduce in seconds what took me 20, 30 pages in the book to do.
When they were adapting the book to the screenplay, were you like a consultant? Did they consult you on certain things,
Informal.
or did you have any input?
Informal. So I had a good relationship with the director. Was also writing a screenplay with one of the actors. I can't think of. I'm just drawing a blank on the name of the actor who he was working with. So he showed me the screenplay when he was done. I gave him a list of notes. He took about half of my notes, and made changes based on about half of them. And the changes he made, I think, helped improve the movie.
Were there ever parts that you insisted had to be in
I couldn't do that.
You couldn't do that?
First of all, it would make no sense to me too. But second of all, when you option something, if I was Stephen King, maybe I could get that sort of deal. But they own the rights. They can do whatever they want. I almost was in the movie. I came really close to being in the movie. There was a part. One of the characters, with a retired ex-cop, they had starts calling Joe a bunch of names and spits in his food. And the director wanted me to do it, and the producers wanted me to do it. But it was filmed up in Canada, and the Canadian Screen Actors Guild would not let them give me that part.
Huh.
So we're all set for me to do it, but they would, they just would not budge. That had to go to a Canadian actor. You get these great tax breaks if you film up there, but part of what you have to give up is you have to give a certain number of roles to Canadians. And that was one of the roles that they wanted for a Canadian.
That's kind of funny.
Yeah.
Kind of odd. So, all right. So let's talk about let's talk about your writing process now. One of the reasons I do this is for hopefully aspiring authors who come in to talk to me and ask about writing and how to get started and stuff. Of course, I'm not a writer; I'm just a bookseller. But I do read a lot. But this is so I send them to these, and that's kind of how I started all this. What is your process for writing? Do you sit down at a certain time, certain day, or is it just sort of when something comes to you and you break out a notebook, break out a computer or your phone, and take notes?
Okay.
Or
So the writing process changes over the years. Where ideas come from. Originally, it's kind of hard to say. Sometimes maybe reading a newspaper story or reading a couple of newspaper stories. Stories might get merged together, and you might end up playing a lot of what if games, and from that you end up having an idea, and from the idea, you might end up working on an outline and actually developing a plot. Told you the idea for Caretaker came from needing to spite my wife for saying that I couldn't write a book about it. Monster, that just came from having the idea of having the same major events happening from Shelley's book, but happening in for very different reasons in this horror novel. So once you get an idea, then for me it's a matter of then working on an outline. And I like to work for the novels. I like to work from a detailed outline. For short stories, I can usually build the outline in my head. I don't have to write it down. But at a certain point, I also got to the point where if I wanted to, I didn't have to wait for inspiration to come up with an idea. I reached the point a few years ago where if I, say for the Jacob Stone book, I needed to come up with another thrill idea. I just worked at it. I knew, I know how to, at this point, just come up with ideas and then develop those ideas into plots. And once I have the plot, turn that into a, 10, 12, 14 page outline, and from that, writing a book from it. So I think as a writer, you grow over time. I've written a lot of books. I think I've had 18 professionally published, and I've self-published maybe 5 or 6, and I've written a lot of short stories. I think I've probably had 50, 60 short stories published by different places. So at some point, you still have to think, you still have to work at it, but you get to where you can generate the ideas as opposed to waiting for inspiration to give you the idea.
How do you organize your ideas? Do you you say you have a 14-page outline, so obviously you use some sort of computer word processor type thing, but do you use like was it Scrivener, or do you just keep notes?
Just Microsoft Word. I'll just write it. Just write it like I'm writing a novel. I'm just writing it. This is writing the sequence of events, and maybe writing a little bit more about what the character's going to be. But at some point, while it becomes a little bit more real than just an idea or plot, you start imagining the characters. And what's interesting is at some point while you're actually writing a book, it becomes more alive. It becomes almost a living and breathing thing. So once that happens, you find yourself taking detours from the outline and then working your way back to the outline. So new characters might show up, new events might occur, but I always try to force my way back to the outline. And so I have the roadmap, but I might take a few detours while taking the trip.
When you take these detours and you try to circle back to the outline, do you ever find that you backed yourself into a corner or something like that?
So far, that hasn't happened. You also develop instincts. So my instincts now as a writer are much stronger than when I started out. So at some point you know what's going to work before you write it. And that might not be true early on, but again, it's like anything else. When you do it long enough and you do it enough times, you're going to grow in it. You're going to learn from it, and you're going to become better at it. So I've reached the point where I know before I start something, or if I take a detour, whatever I'm working on, I know if it's going to work or if it isn't. And if it doesn't work, I might tinker around with the idea of it and try to figure out how I can make it work. So I'd say my instincts are pretty good at this point.
So have you ever been watching the game or been out at a game or out with friends, family, whatever, and just all of a sudden an idea hits you and just, hey, quick, somebody give me a pen and a paper.
I'll remember it.
You remember it?
If it's worth remembering, I'll remember it.
So how do you develop your characters? Who do you where do you get your ideas for your characters from? Do you people around you, friends, family, kind of mesh or mosh, characteristics of people together?
Well, let's say that somebody really pisses me off and I want to kill them off. They might be one of my victims in my book. But I'd say again, it's imagination mostly. It's they live in my head, and they'll at some point they become living, breathing things.
Do you ever have a character in any of your books where you really liked this character so much, it just everything about it came out really well, between the way it talks, the way his appearance or her appearance, but that you have to kill that character at
Yeah.
some point in the book, and you're just sort of are you ever devastated when that time comes?
Yeah, my very first book, a character who I wasn't planning, wasn't in my outline, got born, and I ended up liking her quite a bit. And I kept delaying and delaying and delaying the death, but eventually it had to come.
And what about the opposite? Because I've had some writers who have running series, and they have just characters that continue showing up in different books, and it's like, I really want to kill this character. I don't like this character, but that character just fits in that particular book, be it 2 or 3 books down the line, but it still pops up, but they just can't kill it.
Most of my books are standalone. So the books that are the Jacob Stone, but all the others are standalone. And the Jacob Stone books, I did put a lot of thought into the cast of characters before I wrote them, and it's almost like a family. And so none of them have gone, the ones that are annoying are intentionally annoying and comedically annoying. One thing with the Jacob Stone books is I want the characters who die to be very real. I want the deaths to matter. I don't want it to be entertainment. I want the reader to feel for it. So I end up killing off all the characters. I end up, well, not all, but a lot of the characters I end up killing off in those books I like a lot, and I think the readers are going to like a lot. And it's painful to kill them off, but
Mhm.
it has to happen. There's nothing I can do about it.
So the theme or the plot of the book, is it sort of ripped out of the headlines thing for you, or is it
No,
something
no,
completely
not
original?
with. The Jacob Stone, again, I wanted to make each one very original. I didn't want them to be copies of each other. So for example, one of them relies on a major twist halfway through that's going to catch the reader completely off guard. Another one deals with a serial killer who wants fame, and a film, wannabe filmmaker who desperately wants fame, and what happens when those two cross paths. And a third, fame tends to be, since they take place in LA, fame tends to be the one thing in common with the books. But third is also, it's like a very devious, plot. I don't want to give anything away, but again, each one is a very, very unique type of story and very different from one another, even though Morris Brook and his team and his pet bull terrier are all constants in it.
So all right, so the first draft is done, the rough draft is done. Now I know you worked with publishers, so obviously they must have editors that you send it to. Did you do that at the beginning? Do you still use editors now? know enough after having done so many books to edit on your own? Do you use beta readers?
I always use beta readers for my books, even the ones that go to publishers. So yeah, what you do, what ends up happening with a publishing house is you're working with a specific editor. They might have a very light hand or they might have a very heavy hand, depending on the publisher and the house and the editor. The Serpent's Tail editor I worked with had a very light hand. The books had almost no changes made to them. Then they'll go to a copy editor who'll fix, whatever mistakes need to be fixed. And you get a chance to review it and make your requested changes, and that's the process. So I've had books that have gone through the editing process, and I've had almost no changes made. And I've had books where I've had the editors make dramatic, not changes to the plot, but a lot of changes to the writing style, which I don't really appreciate. But you work with it the best you can, and with I've had like I think I've had 15 of the Julius Katz stories published so far, and I put them in collections. And when I was putting them in collections, I was going over the changes that the Janet Hutchings, the editor of Ellery Queen, made to the stories, so I could make the collections match what was, be exactly what was in the magazines. And she had a very light touch. I mean, she only fixed, mistakes, mostly. I mean, occasionally there'd be a few redundant or unnecessary words pulled out, but I'd say like those stories were like 99.5% matching what I originally provided. So I can write fairly cleanly where it doesn't need a lot of editing, but I also know how to edit. I'll just tell you a real quick story about editing that I found very impressive. There's this, in the noir world, there's this almost mythical novel called Grimhaven, written by Charles Willeford, that every noir reader wants to read. So Charles Willeford wrote this book. His publisher refused to publish it. His agent refused to let him sell it to anyone else because he told him his career would be over if it ever got published. And so the manuscript ended up at the Florida Library of his hometown. And someone mimeographed a few copies of it, and those few copies would get sent around to different people who, someone found out that I wanted to read it and they sent me a copy of it. It's an amazing book. But what's really interesting is you're reading his first draft where he crosses out a few words here and there and replaces them with other words, and that was it. So the first draft was almost perfect, because that's what you had with these old-fashioned writers. A lot of them were newspaper people, and they knew how to write, make the first draft nearly perfect, right off the bat. And that's my ideal, is to try to do that. And I'll never get to the point where Willeford was with Grimhaven, but I keep trying.
How long does it take you to write a book?
The shortest book I wrote, which was actually a long book, was Prior. That was almost 100,000 words, but I wrote it in a blind rage over 6 weeks.
Oh, wow.
I was so pissed off at every New York publisher for rejecting small crimes. And I was happy to sell to a London publisher, but then after NPR picks it as the best crime and mystery novel, I was just, and seeing all these South Boston mobsters getting these book deals and some other things that happened, it just pissed me off. And I wrote this really brutal book that was part crime novel and part satire on the publishing industry. And I just whipped that thing out in like 6 weeks. I'd say it takes an average 3 months, sometimes less, sometimes. The only book that took more than 3 months was the first book, Fast Lane, because I kept rewriting that, learning and figuring out how to do it. And so that probably took a couple of years. And then Monster took, again, 9 months of research and a year of writing, to get that right.
With your beta readers, did you use some just to as targeted readers for technical aspects of your books, or
No,
did you?
they're more. I have one good friend from college who loves to criticize my stuff and rip it apart. So he's a great beta reader because he'll anything that's at all suspect I'll get from him. Some readers like that to get feedback on it. The worst thing is getting feedback from readers who just tell you they love your stuff. So that doesn't help you.
Right.
So so over the years I've collected a bunch of readers who I can trust in that they will be brutally honest and won't try and love nothing more than finding fault with whatever I write.
So how did you end up getting a deal with a London-based publisher?
Okay, so this is actually a little bit of an interesting story. So Serpent's Tail at the time they were publishing a bunch of Nobel Prize winners. They were very picky, very tough house to get into. So they published literary fiction, crime noir, and erotica, but very high level literary erotica. And they had a legendary publisher, Peter Etten, and a legendary noir editor, John Williams. And so two of their authors, Vicki Hendricks and Ken Broom, took a look at small crimes, loved it, and so I got to know John Williams a little bit. He was on the rare avis list, and he saw, I sent him what Vicki and Ken had to say about it, and he said, "Oh, I'll take a look at it, but I got to tell you up front, we only buy things that we feel like we cannot live without. So the odds of us publishing it are probably like 1 in 10,000. So don't get your hopes up." And so I sent it to him, and a year later, hadn't heard anything. I had a friend writer, really talented writer named Ed Gorman. I don't know if you know him. He wrote a lot of mysteries and westerns and horror, and really good, excellent short story writer. He passed away a few years ago, but just a terrific writer and a really good guy. And so he had a imprint, sort of an imprint with the library publisher called Five Star, and so he wanted me to have the book published for Five Star, and I really did not want to sell the book to Five Star and have it show up only in libraries, which I thought the book deserved. I wanted the book to have a chance of getting newspaper reviews and getting a larger number of people reading it. But after a year of not hearing from Serpent's Tail, I signed a contract with Five Star, and then 1 week after signing that contract, John Williams calls me up and says, "Dave, we can't live without your book." So I then spent a month begging Five Star to take another book instead, and we ended up working out a deal, and they took Bad Thoughts, and they released Serpent's Tail. Released Small Crimes for Serpent's Tail, and so Serpent's Tail published it, and the rest was history.
You said you used Kensington Press as well. I've interviewed quite a few people lately who have used them.
Which
Are they
one?
Kensington?
Yeah, so Kensington, what happened there was I met the editor, Michaela Hamilton, one of the Butchicons, and she told me she wanted me to write a series for them. And so then it was a matter of figuring out what type of series I could write for them. And, it was kind of limited. Most of the series that would make, I'm not going to write cozy. Even though I write the Julius Katz stuff isn't cozies. They might be fairly tame compared to my other stuff, but there's still kind of a hot edge to them. And so the choice was cozy or serial killer. And I didn't think I could write a serial killer series, but then I read John Lutz. He wrote a series for them, and his writing was just great. I mean, he's just he's like Donald Westlake. He's one of those guys who's been writing. I mean, he passed away recently, but he's one of these guys who's been writing for like the last 30, 40 years. It's just at the top, at the top of all the mystery writers out there. Just a terrific writer. And he wrote I can't remember the name of the main character, but I read like all the books in the series, and it's like, this stuff is just, this is the type of thing that I could write something not exactly like it, but I could use this as an idea to come up with something that I could be happy with. And so once I read his books, I came up with a idea for this series that Michaela approved of, and then I started writing these.
So we're just about out of time. I did want to ask though, what is one of the biggest things that you miss about being an author in the past 14 months in the time of COVID?
Well, I kind of
Do you ever do conventions or anything like that, or?
Yeah, I mean, like there's certain events that, like every year I was going to the Ellery Queen, the old cocktail party in New York. Like last year I was nominated for an Edgar, and I was, it would have been fun going to, there's like about 30 or 40 writers that I'll see every year at this cocktail party. And last year would have been a little more special because I would have been going to the Edgars right afterwards as one of the nominees. And so that was, I'm friends with became good friends with a bunch of people there. And, so that was kind of, kind of a hard thing to miss. But, it's hard to complain too much when you see how much COVID has devastated so much of the country and so many people. So not being able to go to a cocktail party or go to a ButcherCon or whatever seems kind of trivial when you see what impact it's had on society as a whole. So, for the most part, one thing it's done is it's inspired a bunch of pandemic stories out of me. So I've written a whole bunch of them.
I was just going to ask that because early last year, well, actually midsummer, fall, so all of a sudden I start seeing all these stories, people writing quick little short stories or books or whatever about this deadly virus and everything. And is it too soon? Is it
Well, I have one story that I sold to Ellery Queen where it's a detective story, not Julius Katz, a different, more of a hard-boiled detective story, and they're trying to solve a murder where everybody's wearing masks. So it makes things a little tougher when everybody's wearing masks.
Right.
And then I have another story that I sold to Alfred Hitchcock. That's kind of a weird story in that it was part sci-fi, part mystery, and so I wasn't sure whether it would be right for Alfred Hitchcock or whether I needed to sell to a sci-fi magazine. But Alfred Hitchcock bought it, and again, it takes place during the pandemic, and it's the pandemic plays a role, but it's also, but again, at its heart, it's a sci-fi story. It's mixed sci-fi and mystery.
Now, are these short stories that people are able to get now, or are they just Are they still in the
They'll be
process of
coming
being-
out whenever, what, you know, you never know what issue your stories are gonna come out in. You can sell a story and it might be out 2 years later. You don't
Okay.
know.
So
It's,
what do we have in the works for you coming out very soon? Anytime soon?
There's a new Julius Katz story in the July-August issue of Ellery Queen. I just collected 8 of my Julius Katz stories and put out a second volume myself of Julius Katz stories called More Julius Katz and Archie. And I've got a bunch of short stories. I've got a novella that's going to be coming out, published by a small press. And hopefully Caretaker Lawn Field gets made and we get to see that in the theaters at some point over the next year and a half, 2 years.
Definitely have to let us know when and if that happens. Where can people get these collections of the Julius Katz collections?
They could order it from your bookstore.
Good answer.
That's what I would recommend.
Yeah, yeah. So definitely let us know whatever books you're interested in. We can get. They're also if they're available through Ingram,
I think they are.
they'll also be available through bookshop.org.
I bet you they can probably get it from bookshop.org.
Cool. So yeah, so everybody check out, either give us a call, we can order it. Bookshop.org is another great place. Definitely check out, is the film still
Still on Netflix.
still on
Notice how I
Netflix?
didn't use the A word.
Yes, and I do appreciate, I give everybody one time. to
No,
use
no.
that.
To me, that South American River has effed up the publishing industry big time,
Really.
and they've effed up all aspects of it. So
Well, we do definitely do. As I think I can speak for quite a few of the booksellers that we do appreciate the authors who will promote bookstores, bookshop.org, over the evil river is what.
yeah,
So we do
yeah. But
appreciate that.
I order all my books from real bookstores. I don't order them from the evil river.
The evil river.
Which has piranhas in it, right? You order something there, you don't know what's gonna
You never know.
what's gonna
Bull,
pop up.
bull sharks, piranha, yeah, all kinds of things that'll eat up the little person, right? Well,
right.
Dave, it's been great talking with you. Thank you very much. We definitely will be getting your books at some point in your store, in our store. And so, like I said, give us a call though until we have it. Give us a call. We'll order it for you, or bookshop.org. And I'm definitely going to check out the Netflix, and can't wait to hear about the other one.
Okay, thanks a lot, Chris.
Well, thank you,
Great talking with
everybody. You too.
Okay, bye.